The other day, my daughter Trin was complaining about how quickly the holiday had passed and how she wasn't really very keen on going back to school next week. I pointed out to her that this is the very last September she will have as a pupil in school, and although going back into something very familiar might seem a bit boring, this time next year she'll be facing some completely new beginnings. We will have moved, so she'll have a new area of the country to get to know, and she will probably be getting ready to start university. For me as a Methodist, the 1st of September is always an exciting day. It marks the start of the Methodist year. Ministers who have moved always start work on the 1st of September. Growing up as the daughter of Methodist ministers means that the 1st of September has always held some kind of special significance. When I was young, it just seemed like something very mystical. Now that I'm in ministry, I find that when it comes around, I'm excited and fidgety and optimistic. It's a new beginning. And for me this year, knowing that I will be starting a new appointment on the 1st of September next year, it feels particularly significant and a bit poignant. We don't always welcome new beginnings. Some we can choose, but sometimes we might feel that changes are thrust upon us. Sometimes a new beginning might feel like an unexpected new opportunity, something to be embraced. But sometimes we can be fearful or resentful of it. Sometimes we might dread it, and at other times we might be absolutely ready for it. For us today, as for many other churches, it marks the beginning of gathering for worship again in a way that is much more familiar than the way we've been doing things for a number of weeks. That might just be that the chairs are out as they were before the pandemic, and that you're looking forward to being able to have a cuppa after the service together again. But I hope that it's more than that. I hope that you are even more excited at the thought that the God we worship is a God of new beginnings. And who knows yet what God has in store for us this year? I hope you're excited. I hope you're alive to God and open to the infinite, transformative possibilities that lie in God's hands. Transformative possibilities. That's what our reading from Isaiah today is all about. It's a poem of hope and trust and commitment. It's a poem about being open and allowing God to transform all that seems dead and lifeless and hopeless. It's a poem about joy and fulfillment and glory. It's a poem for us today. Anything is possible when we allow God to come into our lives. The poems of the Old Testament often have a kind of symmetrical structure, or sometimes a mirrored structure. I don't want to bore you with a lot of technical detail, but being a person who does like that kind of thing, I really like the fact that I can see the shape of that when I read this passage. It seems to me that to see this we need to start in the middle of the passage. Verse 4 is actually the most important part. This is the verse in which we get the promise of God's coming rescue. Say to those who are of a fearful heart, "Be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you." Everything in this poem hangs on that. Everything in our lives hangs on that. God is here and God will save. Without that promise, both humanity and the whole of the wider creation are lost and helpless. But God will save. God will make reparations. God will give good gifts. God will restore justice. So verse 4 is the central verse, and imagine that to be a kind of mirror. Now if you look at the verse that comes before it and the verse and a half that come after it, you can see that they reflect each other. These verses are the promise of transformation for all humanity. Verse 3 reads, "Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees." Then we get the promise of rescue in verse 4, and verses 5 to 6 show the transformation that is possible in human life through the liberating activity of God. The eyes of the blind shall be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. These verses are a metaphor, an illustration of the unimaginable difference that God makes in the lives of people like us, who choose to trust in and live for God. God is present and acting for all those whose lives seem to be overwhelmed by fear, by timidity, by vulnerability, by lack of courage, by a perceived lack of capacity to live a full life. God is present with and acting for us. God is here to liberate us from anything that prevents us living joyfully. The dramatic impact of God on human life is amazing, but it doesn't start and stop with us. God's love for us, God's transformative possibilities for us are matched by God's love for and transformative possibilities for the whole of creation. Verses 1 to 3 are reflected in the second part of verse 6 and verse 7. The wilderness and dry land shall be glad, the desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus it shall blossom abundantly. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. This is a vivid description of the new creation. Life begins again and new creation emerges because of God's love and power and presence and resolve. Isaiah is showing us that both humanity and creation are in the same boat. We all depend on God for our survival. On our own, things might seem hopeless, but rain is promised and God is coming. There will be flourishing. There can be a danger with this kind of passage that we actually read it with an air of pessimism. We might read the passage and think, well, I'm in a bad situation and I can't see any sign of this transformation. Or we might take it very literally and think, well, my knees are bad and I can't hear as well as I used to. Why doesn't God change that? If our focus is absolutely on physical change, and if we don't see it happen, then we can make people feel inadequate or abandoned. We can make people feel that God's promise isn't for them. And I don't believe that's true. I cannot answer the question why people suffer, but I do believe that God is with us and that God never leaves us. God suffers alongside us. And I can't say why physical transformation doesn't always happen in the way we would like. But I do believe that God's transformative possibilities are much bigger than we can imagine, and that with God, even the darkest situation can become a place of growth and joy and blessing. And I also think that we mustn't underestimate our own part in God's work of transformation. As followers of Jesus, we have committed ourselves to be Christ's body in the world, so we are also agents of God's transformative love. We might not be able to give someone back their sight, but perhaps our love and care for someone in a desperate place might help them to see a way forward. We might not be able to firm up feeble knees, but perhaps we can be someone to lean on. And it's hard because sometimes we only want to do those things for the people we like or the people we naturally care about. I'm particularly personally challenged at the moment by the situation in Afghanistan. I know that I can be an agent of transformation by doing something positive to help the refugees, but how easy do I find it to pray for the Taliban or for those who are spreading violence and bloodshed? It seems to me that the world will only be changed when humanity can choose to put aside hatred and fear and choose to love and support our global relatives and seek the flourishing of the other. But it's so hard. It's hard to pray for those who are doing terrible things. And our love for the rest of humanity must also be matched by our love and care for creation. We cannot expect God to transform the world if we are actively contributing to its destruction. We have a part to play. The news is good. God is with us and God will bring transformation and renewal to us personally, to the people of the world and to the whole of creation. But we need to get involved. We need to embrace the transformation that comes to us through the Spirit and exhibit the joy that is a result of that. And then we need to step out, to be people who want to act, to bring about the change we long to see. We need to ask God, who are we to be? And what do we need to do? And we need to be ready to embrace the answer we receive. And then like streams in the desert, God's love and grace may flow more and more through us into God's wonderful world. Amen.